Uh, this is Mike Kramer, the Calibration Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation, and I want to welcome you all to this month's webinar. As you can see from the opening slide here, today's topic was 17025 and PJLA's policy PL-1 proficiency testing, Intra-Lab, Intra-Lab comparison. And basically what we are looking for as an accrediting body when we assess and do accreditations and reaccreditations. This webinar is being recorded, so if you want to go back and listen to it on our website at www.pjlabs.com under the training tab, I believe is a past webinar. Also, on that, on the website is all the past webinars. So if you have a colleague that may not have been able to sign in that would like to have been present on today's webinar, they can go back and view the recording. This webinar, like the previous one, is going to follow the same protocol, which we will I will present the topic at hand. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and there'll be instructions on how to do that. You should have, I believe, on your screen a tool where you can ask these questions. These will be submitted directly to our headquarters. Ms. Tammy Norris at our PJLA headquarters in Troy, Michigan, is assisting me with this presentation and will get those questions to me. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start today's presentation, which is proficiency testing. It seems to be a topic of great interest. It seems to be an area that a lot of labs struggle with, particularly new labs seeking accreditation, getting that proficiency test under their belt, understanding what the requirements are, exactly what a proficiency test is, how to analyze it. So a little bit on ILAC and the ILAC policy for participation in proficiency testing activities. ILAC has a policy in regards to proficiency testing, which is P9. Hence, PJLA, we are a signatory of the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation and of also the Asia-Pacific Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation for testing and calibration. Hence, as you'll see, the P9 policy does trickle down to the accrediting bodies, and so we have our policy, which we incorporate the ILAC policies in under our PL-1. A couple things that specified in ILAC P9, Section 4.2, the minimum PT activity according to a laboratory or inspection bodies where relevant scope is. Basically, you have to have evidence of satisfactory participation prior to gaining accreditation where proficiency testing is available and appropriate. PL-9 also states further and ongoing activity that is appropriate to the scope of accreditation and consistent with the PT participation plan. In other words, it's not a one-time activity. Continuing with some of the highlights in ILAC's policy guide P9, ABs, that stands for accrediting bodies, in which PJLA is one, shall have a policy on the use of the activities in the assessment and accreditation process. This policy shall include the following. Bullet 1, a reference to the importance of PT. PT is short, of course, for proficiency testing, as a tool to demonstrate laboratory and inspection bodies' competence where relevant. and to assist in maintaining the quality of the laboratory or inspection body's performances. You see, this guide is, this policy is geared toward both laboratories and also inspection bodies. Bullet item number 2 there, any requirements regarding the minimum level and frequency of participation in PT by accredited laboratories, including the need for a PT participation plan, which has been formulated by the laboratory or inspection body, where relevant, and is regularly reviewed in response to changes in staffing, methodology, instrumentation, etc. So for under P9, accrediting bodies shall fully document their policies and procedures in relation to the use of PTs. And particularly, they, us, the accrediting body, must be able to evaluate through the accreditation process that the participation in PT activities of laboratories and, where relevant, inspection bodies accredited by them is effective and that corrective actions are carried out when necessary. Lastly, and this is still in ILAC's P9, it is recognized that there are some areas of testing and calibration for which suitable PTs does not exist or is not practical. In such cases, the accreditation body or the laboratory, or where relevant, the inspection body shall discuss and agree on suitable alternatives, means by which performances can be assessed and monitored. This would need to be considered as part of the planned PT and or related activities. So hence, we have IDAC's policy P9. So in response to that, Perry-Johnson Laboratory Accreditation has our policy guide, actually PL number 1, which is Perry-Johnson's Laboratory Accreditation Incorporated Proficiency Testing Requirements. This document is available on our website, which is www.pjlabs.com. Under the Resource tab. We actually have PL-1, 2, 3, and 4 there. So if you don't have a copy of this, you want to review it, you're looking to get accredited, this will be an external document that you need to incorporate into your quality management system. So we're looking at our policy guide now, PL-1. So right off the bat, section 2.1, prior to accreditation PJLA, an applicant organization must provide objective evidence of proficiency testing activity for at least one item included in its desired scope of accreditation. The item that the organization chooses for proficiency testing must be one that is suitable to demonstrate the competence of the organization for the main field of activity, either calibration or testing. The results of this proficiency testing must be meaningful in that the organization not only needs to perform proficiency testing, the resulting data must demonstrate the organization's competence in performing the specified test or calibration. That's pretty straightforward there. If you are seeking accreditation, prior to being accredited, you have to have at least one successful proficiency test under your belt. And again, under PL-1, this is not a one-time event. Upon achievement accreditation by PJLA, organizations are required to perform proficiency testing annually, once a year. Results of this testing shall be monitored during the organization's subsequent surveillance and reaccreditation assessments. At a minimum, organizations are required to have objective evidence of favorable proficiency testing for each discipline in their scope of accreditation within a 4-year cycle. So we have 2 time frames there. PTs have to be done annually, and each discipline has to be covered within a 4-year cycle. So PL-1 goes into developing a proficiency testing plan. Like stated earlier, it's not a one-time event. You have to have one under your belt prior to accreditation. So one thing I want to sort of define is the disciplines and subdisciplines. This is spelled out in PL-1. There's examples on developing a 4-year plan. So basically, we're talking about a discipline, and we'll show you some examples here on the next slide. A discipline is a category of calibrations or set of tests intended to quantify or evaluate common or related parameters of a unit, device, or substance submitted for calibration or test. So in regards to discipline, in PJLA, we have testing and calibration labs. Calibration labs have the following disciplines: acoustic, chemical, dimensional, electrical, mass force and weighing devices, mechanical, optical, thermodynamic, time and frequencies. Each one of those is referred to in the realm of PL-1 as a discipline. Testing, if you're a testing lab, your areas of accreditation will encompass disciplines in the area of acoustical, biological, chemical, dimensional, inspection, electrical, environmental, mechanical, microbiological, non-destructive, and thermodynamic. Now I'm going to look at the concept of a subdiscipline. These are areas that fall under the various disciplines. So a subdiscipline, at a minimum, a subdiscipline, and we're going to look at some examples here on the next slide. At a minimum, a subdiscipline is an element of an associated calibration or test discipline for which the magnitude of a stated parameter has been defined as a measurement objective and will be determined by a specified method using appropriate skills and equipment. A subdiscipline may be composed of one or more such elements where the organization has determined that the measurement objective, the specified method, and the appropriate equipment are either identical or similar to such a degree that they can be considered as mutually representative. In addition, the organization shall have determined that the successful performance of either would be satisfactory objective evidence of the technical competence. And there's a whole lot there. We're going to go over to the next screen, and hopefully this will make things a little clearer as far as a discipline and a subdiscipline. And these will all come together in the development of your 4-year proficiency testing plan. So top there we have an example of a calibration lab. Under the discipline of dimensional, they calibrate micrometers, dial indicators, and calipers. So for the dimensional discipline, the organization has determined that the measurement objective, the specified method, and the appropriate skills and equipment used to calibrate micrometers and to calibrate calipers are either identical or similar to such a degree that they can be considered as mutually representative. So in other words, in this example, you can do a proficiency test that will, as a subdiscipline, micrometers and calipers could be captured under the one proficiency test. The standards, the equipment, basically there's enough similarities, just maybe some dissimilarities in the artifact. But basically, if you have the procedure and the standards and the personnel to calibrate the micrometers, you can do so also with the calipers. For testing, an example is specified on this slide. Under mechanical testing, the laboratory has determined that this is a discipline. Under mechanical testing, they have threaded fasteners, knob harness, machine components, Vickers harness, and leaf spring Rockville harness, or things that, in this example, that this lab tests under their mechanical discipline. So in this instance, for the mechanical test and discipline, the organization has determined that the measurement objective, the specified method, and the appropriate skills and equipment used to test hardness by the Knope and Vickers methods are either identical or similar to such a degree that they can be considered as mutually representative. So the same would apply to the Calibration Lab. So in this instance, a proficiency test that would cover the Knope and Vickers methods could be captured in one proficiency test. I know we have a lot of folks sign in here doing under various different calibration or testing laboratories. So basically, if you look at your disciplines and then your sub-disciplines under there, if basically the procedure, the standard, the equipment are similar to the effect where if you can test or calibrate one of the sub-disciplines, you can do others. They can be referred to as actually composite sub-disciplines and can be captured under one proficiency test. So we have disciplines, we have sub-disciplines. So again, at a minimum, organizations are required to have objective evidence of proficiency testing for each discipline in their scope of accreditation within a 4-year cycle. And so we have a 4-year plan in PL-1. An example here, if an organization is accredited for only 4 disciplines and have 2 that have no sub-disciplines. So in other words, there's just one line item under there, while the other 2 disciplines have multiple sub-disciplines. All 4 disciplines must be represented on the 4-year plan at least once during the 4 years in which the plan is active. 2 disciplines have no sub-disciplines to choose from and will be present on the plans in the years chosen by the organization. The other 2 disciplines will be represented by selections from their sub-disciplines. The sub-disciplines chosen are to be from the more challenging of those available. During the next 4-year plan, those disciplines represented by selected sub-disciplines will be represented by different sub-disciplines, selected again from the more challenging from those remaining. So in a nutshell, for the 4-year plan, all 4 disciplines have to be covered. If you have some with multiple sub-disciplines, you have to choose from those areas the most challenging to be included in the initial 4-year plan. Again, these are minimum requirements. During the next reoccurring 4-year plan, again, all disciplines need to be captured. However, for those that have multiple sub-disciplines, you would then choose from the next in line as far as difficulty to test or calibrate. So PL-1, Section 3.2, organizations seeking accreditation shall develop a 4-year PT plan using the PJLA template. PT plan form LF81, I have an example of that on the next slide, or equivalent document prior to initial assessments. Again, prior to assessment, your initial assessments, you need to have that one PT under your belt, and you're going to have to develop your 4-year plan. Ideally, your plan, if it can be submitted to PJLA prior to the assessment for it to be evaluated, that would be preferred. If not, the assessor will review it during the actual assessment. This plan will be reviewed by the assessment team during the on-site visit for compliance to this policy. Again, specified in PL-1, PT plans must address all disciplines on the scope at least once during the time interval covered by the 4-year plan. Where a discipline is composed of several subdisciplines, the subdisciplines chosen shall be from among the more challenging and comprehensive within the specific discipline. Each successive subdiscipline chosen in subsequent proficiency tests shall be from the more challenging of the subdiscipline remaining. The process shall continue until all disciplines and subdisciplines have been included at least one. Within the time period when any 4-year plan is active, not all subdisciplines may be selected for proficiency tests. However, all disciplines shall be represented at least once during each successful 4-year period. The LF81 that was referenced in the previous slide, have an excerpt of one here. It's actually should go down to number 4 here. This is the LF81 form, which is available on our website under the Resource tab under Forms. You can retrieve this document to construct your 4-year proficiency testing plan. A couple other things to note here. Proficiency testing plans. Accredited organizations wishing to expand their scope shall apply the requirements of the applicable sections in PL-1, thus modifying the 4-year plan as necessary to include the capabilities being added as a result of the scope expansion. In other words, if you expand your scope, you need to look at your proficiency testing plan. And actually, it could go the other way around if you maybe you decrease your scope. This will directly impact your proficiency test, your 4-year proficiency testing plan. Also, 17025 requires reviews of policy and procedure as a mandatory activity during management reviews. Accredited organizations shall be able to provide objective evidence that their policies and procedures related to proficiency testing are reviewed for suitability. Under 415 of 17025 management reviews, a line item is proficiency testing, so that during the annual management review, any scope expansion or subtraction should be looked at, and the proficiency testing plan should be looked at to determine whether or not it is still suitable moving forward. We're going to look at different types of proficiency testing. One I want to mention briefly is the International Scheme for Proficiency Testing. This is a line item that's not included or incorporated in the 4-year plan. But PJLA is required to participate in proficiency testing program sponsored by recognized bodies, including but not limited to the Asia Pacific Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation and the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. PJLA will select potential participants from its listing of accredited or applicant organizations and select nominees from those who qualify on the basis of CMCs or detecting limits appropriate for the calibration or test available. These will be at no cost to the organization except for the time to perform the test. Organizations will be selected on a voluntary basis. However, PJLA reserves the right to require participation by any organization. So in other words, ILAC will send PJLA artifacts or samples, and we are required to have labs participate in these international schemes of proficiency testing. These are artifacts or samples that were tested perhaps different areas of the world by other organizations accredited by other ABs, and at time to time PJLA will receive these proficiency tests from either ILAC or APLAC, and we would incorporate those into our pool of laboratories. Hence, hopefully voluntarily, we will offer them out to selected nominees from our scopes, from our various scopes of accreditation under our umbrella. If we're unable to get anything voluntarily, it may be something that we would have to do on an involuntary basis. Now, as far as putting together your internal proficiency testing plan and performing your proficiency tests, the following activities, and these are listed in order of preference and acceptability, have been approved by PJLA for the purpose of demonstrating proficiency. Top of the list there are a participation in proficiency testing program sponsored by a third-party accredited provider. There is a standard 17043 for proficiency testing providers. There are folks that are in the business of providing proficiency tests. They will send the organization out the artifact or sample to test. The results would be submitted back to the third-party provider and analyzed and report produced by the third-party accredited provider. Not all of them are accredited. Second on the list of preference here is participation in proficiency testing programs sponsored by a third-party provider. Next down the list of accepted method by PJLA for proficiency testing, for performing proficiency tests is interlaboratory comparisons. Two or more accredited testing or calibration lab coordinates a proficiency test among themselves. Now we look at other means of proficiency test. When the use of the approved method on the previous slide is considered by the organization as being impractical as a means of demonstrating proficiency, the following activities listed in their order of preference may be used pending prior approval by PJLA. First one is Intra-Lab. That is where the proficiency test is conducted within the confines of the organization. Last on the pecking order there is repeatability study, which is basically what is stating there. You repeat the same results. That's at the bottom of the list. You could be repeating the results. It could be the wrong results. An important note, and this is specified in PL-1, if an organization wishes to proceed with one of the above-mentioned means, they must state in writing why third-party or interlaboratory comparisons are not feasible and how they plan to conduct the test and analyze the data. This document shall be submitted to PJLA headquarters for review and approval. So, for example, if you are doing temperature calibrations, you're calibrating RTDs, for an example, there are plenty of third-party providers that do thermometers. Hence, the likelihood of a laboratory getting approved to do an intra-lab comparison would be at 0. So if we have identified a third-party source for doing proficiency tests, and the organization is able to utilize that source, we would require the organization to use the third party if they're unable to conduct an Intra-Lab test in lieu of either an Intra-Lab or a repeatability study. Again, if you feel it's not feasible, if there is no third-party providers, and it may not be practical to perform an Inter-Lab test. Assessment last week on a company that did uniformity studies of furnaces and ovens, temperature uniformity, these great big furnaces, which is basically there is no third-party test that's out there where they're going to send a furnace or an oven for an organization to calibrate. And the feasibility of doing an Inter-Lab would have to be evaluated by this particular organization. If they came up with a reason why an Inter-Lab would not be feasible, then perhaps we would allow an Intra-Lab testing. That's an example that's fresh on my mind from a recent assessment I did. But again, it has to be put into writing why those other alternatives are not feasible. And then you need to also specify, if you're going to do an Intra-Lab, how you're going to plan to conduct and analyze the result in a meaningful way. We're going to look at some ways to analyze proficiency tests here in a few slides, but it's twofold as far as that approval from PJLA headquarters and what the lab needs to put into writing. We'll take a closer look at third-party programs, and that was at the top of the list. That's the preferred method. PJLA promotes third-party proficiency testing and strongly encourages its accredited or applicant organizations to participate in proficiency testing programs sponsored by a third-party provider whenever such a program exists. Some advantages to participating in this type of program are assurance that the proficiency testing takes place at an appropriate and regular interval. You can sign up with a third-party provider and get on a schedule. What I think is most important is actually B, is complete objectivity on the part of the proficiency testing sponsor. It's a third party, independent of your organization, has complete objectivity as far as the reporting and analyzing the data is going to be performed by the third party. You would perform the test on the artifact. You would supply the results to the third party. They would have a reference value. They would have degrees of, uncertainties that your value, your uncertainty would be compared to, and whether or not it fell within the predefined limits. Again, the statistical analysis and reporting of the resultant data by the provider. That's when you submit your data, you're going to get a report. You're going to get a complete analysis and a report of your results, defining those predefining limits. Most times you'll be graphed and charted against other participating labs, and could depict a picture on your results and where it fell within the realm of those predefined acceptable limits. And lastly on the list there, you're required to submit your proficiency testing results to PJLA headquarters, and the direct reporting of the results to PJLA by the provider on behalf of the organization upon availability. Hence, they can also send your results directly to PJLA headquarters. Again, on our website, www.pjlabs.com, there's a listing of some of these proficiency testing providers that can be found on the website. It is a responsibility of the organization to confirm the proficiency testing provider's competence. Competence can be demonstrated in several ways. One is which which is through ISO IEC 17043 2010 compliance or accreditation. Hence, you have actually accredited proficiency testing provider. There is an ISO standard 17043 that the third party has been assessed and would have complied with and would have a certificate under their scope of accreditation for the various proficiency tests that they can coordinate. However, there are other bases for determining competency, such as well-recognized nationally or international programs or organizations mandated by regulatory authorities. If the organization has questions or concerns regarding potential third-party proficiency test providers, contact PJLA headquarters. Okay, going to take a look at interlaboratory comparisons. So what is an interlaboratory comparison? So an acceptable interlaboratory comparison is one in which two or more organizations performing testing or calibration on the same or similar artifact using comparable method under specified conditions. The resulting data from each organization should be in agreement with that of the other participants. Organizations should be accredited or in the applicant stages of accreditation, whenever practical. However, in the cases where participating laboratories are not accredited, then evidence of traceability must be proven as required in PJLA's traceability policy, PL-2. So ideally, if you're going to do an inter-lab comparison, you would want to do it with it minimal, at least one, the more the merrier, other accredited organization. If you elect to use an organization which is not accredited, you're going to have to meet the other organization would have to meet the requirements as specified in PL-2 for traceability. Is they're going to have to show you the traceability of their measurements, traceability of their standards, if they have an ongoing quality assurance program, if they excuse me, also participate in proficiency testing. So there's a form that's filled out. It's an LF-123. If a non-accredited source is to be pursued as an interlaboratory partner, you would need to refer to PL-2 under the section on non-accredited labs for traceability. Look at you're doing an interlaboratory comparison, or even if you're doing an intra-lab comparison, you say bare bones minimum, it's yourself and one other accredited organization. When we come into the facility, we're looking at the data being analyzed in some shape or manner or form where you can show that the resulting comparisons between the two labs either compare or they did not compare. So it needs to be analyzed in some sort of meaningful way, just not here's our data, here's their data. You need to take it and analyze, and whether or not you successfully completed the PT or if there was areas of concern. One method, probably the most popular method, and this is available on our website as well, under Proficiency Testing tab, we have proficiency testing tools. And we have a calculator where you can actually analyze a PT test using what's called an E-normal analysis. So you see there the E-normal analysis, there's the equation for that. So what is that? It's where the lab is the, where lab is the result attained reference, is the value obtained by the outside organization to be used as a reference. U95 is the expanded uncertainty. K equals 2 or 95% of the organization at the 95% confidence level. And U95 reference is the expanded uncertainty of the reference organization at 95% confidence confidence level in the resultant E-normal equation. So the reference or specifying reference, that's the other participating lab. You, of course, your lab would report where it says lab, that's your value. Uncertainty at 95% of the lab, that would be your value. And basically, in a nutshell, what you're looking at here is you have a value, you have a degree of uncertainty. The other lab has a value and the degree of uncertainty. You're looking at for those values with a degree of uncertainty to overlap each other. And the predefined limits, if you plug in the values for this equation, should come within the absolute value of 1. So the values between 1 and -1 is considered to have acceptable measurement and meaningful results. Values beyond the range of -1 to -1 are unacceptable and indicate that the results of the respective organizations are not in agreement. So when I said, bare bones minimum is 2 labs. If you can incorporate more, that's terrific. If you have 2 labs, if it happens to be off, you would have to do your own internal investigation. It could very well be the other lab. So have to determine whether or not it was your lab or not. But you have several participating in there. If one lab out of several falls out, chances would be that that lab would need to do the investigation. E-normal, that's the most popular. That tool is available on our website. There's our other statistical or graphical analysis that may be appropriate. Typically, these involve other statistics. For example, z-scores. It's the correlation analysis of repeat measurement or other graphics technique that compares a laboratory's relative performance in relationship to others in the study in terms of measurement value and variation or uncertainty. This is not an all-inclusive list of statistical methods. There's an ISO document, ISO 13528, for further guidance. So at the bottom there for z-values, there's basically it's looking at your value and your standard deviations or variance. So under repeated measurements or repeated tests, you obtain a standard deviation, and you would compare that to the reference value. And there are predefined limits that represents satisfactory, warning, and unsatisfactory results when you use a z-score. So look at the reference material, other interlaboratory studies that meet the intent or the requirements, and this is going to be prevalent for your testing labs, would be participation as a collaborator in the characterization of a reference material by a competent reference material provider, and someone that falls under the realm of ISO Guide 34. Or the development or refinement of standards to determine bias, precision, repeatability, reproducibility, and or uncertainty in a test or calibration method by a competent or recognized standards developmental bodies. Some examples of accreditations that I have seen is the American Oil Chemists Society, the USDA GIPSA program for grain, Dow AgriScientists, and the Society of Commercial Seed Technologists. Okay, we're going to look at the other methods here where you need to gain PJLA approval. So an interlaboratory comparison is conducted when several analysts or technicians within an organization perform testing or calibration on the same or similar artifact using the same method under specified controlled conditions. The data resulting from this activity shall be analyzed for statistical validity. Again, it's not that you're going to do an Intra-Lab. Let's say you did get approved to do a PT for an Intra-Lab. you're going to have to state in writing how you plan to conduct the test in a meaningful way and analyze the data. Again, that toolbar, that e-normal analysis can be used for an Intra-Lab test. You may have one technician, which you, senior technician, this is just an example, if you can establish your reference value and, if needed, your degree of uncertainty and compare it to other technicians within your organization. But again, that must be put into writing why the others are not feasible and how you plan to conduct and analyze the proficiency test in a meaningful way. And lastly, at the bottom of the list there was repeatability. If none of the aforementioned proficiency testing activities are feasible, as in the case of a specialized organization employing a single technician, proficiency may be demonstrated through repeatability studies with a prior approval of PJLA. Repeatability studies consist of a number of tests or measurement, generally at least 8, performed on the same or similar artifact using the same or specified controlled condition. The results of these studies shall be analyzed for statistical validity by appropriate means. Again, this gives an example of just one technician performing a calibration or test in a very specialized area where perhaps there is no third-party provider, and an InterLab, due to the nature of the test, would not be feasible. The biggest problem, like I stated, with repeatability, it shows you're repeating a value. It could, however, be the wrong value. There may be other examples that various testing activities where this may be the only alternative. Again, just to emphasize for Intra-Lab and repeatability, the requirements are stated right there that it does need to have prior PJLA approval. So that would be submitted to headquarters. It would be reviewed, and the lab would receive a response from us. If it has been approved. If not approved, why it was not approved. I just want to hit on real quickly other areas that's covered under PL-1. And I'm just going to reference the sections to which these apply to, in which PL-1 covers them. And these are in regards to our DoD ELAB program and our EPA program. So basically, under the ELAB, DoD ELAB program, refer to Section 7.0 of PL-1 for additional details and requirements. If you are participating in our EPLA program, refer to Section 8.0 of PL-1 for additional details and requirements. And there's some excerpts out of Sections 7 and 8 in regards to those programs. Okay, covered a lot of ground there in a relatively short period. As I stated in the beginning, I'm going to give you 5 minutes if you would like to submit some questions. I'll do my best to answer them. If you're into a specialized area, say in testing, I'm on the calibration realm. If I'm unsure of the answer, whether or not, say, an Intra-Lab would work, would be an example to specialize. If I don't know the answer, I will. We have your information. If I can't answer it today, I will forward it on to the appropriate person to address it. So currently, I am showing 150 on my cell phone. So we will allow 5 minutes for questions. If you have any you'd like to submit, I will chime back on in about 5 minutes and try to answer as many as I can. questions here. Some of them I may have to defer to some of the testing program manager because I don't want to lead anyone astray if I'm not real sure about the answers to some of these questions. So if a laboratory has a calibration scope and a testing scope, it has to have one PT result for each scope at initial assessments. That's a good question. I don't believe that is addressed in PL-1. My gut reaction would be, yes, it would. You have two scopes of accreditation, one for testing, one for calibration. Amy, I know you're listening at headquarters. I'm giving the wrong answer here, but no, that's not addressed in PL-1. But my initial response would be, yes, you have two certificates of, two scopes of accreditations. You would need to have a PT for each one. If there is no recognized PT program, can the lab choose an Intra-Lab comparison? Do we still need approval from PJLA headquarters? From PJLA. From PJLA, the answer to that is yes. And as you recall, when we were talking about Intra-Lab testing, basically you got to state that in writing. If there's no recognized PT program and you cannot coordinate an Intra-Lab test for whatever reason, we need to put that in writing, and again, the other part of that, how you plan to conduct and analyze the Intra-Lab in a PT test. What PT can be done for adding several climate chambers for genetic product testing? It's one I'm going to have to defer on. Only one I'm familiar with is for germination of seeds, and I know the Association of Official Seed Analysts does conduct germination under various seeds under different temperatures. So again, I will may have to defer that one. I don't like the answer I just gave, but I'm not real sure. Each discipline and or subdiscipline has to be covered in a 4-year period, or at least one item from discipline. Each discipline has to be covered under the 4-year period. If you have items with a multiple subdisciplines, then you would choose from the most challenging. And during your next 4-year plan, you would go down the list. So each discipline has to be covered. And then if you have several subdisciplines under your discipline, and again, these are minimal requirements. You have to choose one from that list. Does third party have to be 17043 accredited? No, there are some on our website that are not accredited. Again, that is sort of, if you're going to go back to purchasing, if you're going to do a third-party provider, you're going to have to determine how to qualify that third-party provider. So again, in your purchase, I would revert back to your purchasing requirements. Does not have to be accredited. If you're unsure, again, it was specified in the presentation, you could defer the question to PJLA headquarters if there is a particular proficiency testing provider which is not accredited. You can, by all means, send that information into headquarters to be reviewed. But no, it does not have to be an accredited provider. Down the list, if you recall, number 1 was an accredited provider. Number 2 was a non-accredited source, and then it went into InterLab testing. Again, another testing question, which I'm going to have to defer, destructive testing. That's something I've thought about with InterLab testing. That destructive testing is something, of course, you're not going to be able to probably get a third-party provider testing organization to do a PT report for you. How can you do a PT for occupancy testing subdiscipline? and I'll have to defer that one. Dimensional disciplines for us has about 20 subdisciplines. And for underdimensional, if you recall, we spoke about you have to look at each one of those subdisciplines and see if they can be combined. If they're using basically the same methods, the same standards and equipment, if you're able to combine them into subdisciplines, you may be able to whittle that down. So again, if not, then you have 20 subdisciplines. And one of the pitfalls, I think, with PL-1, and particularly if you have a lot of subdisciplines, do your 4-year plan, you'll be to do the next, the most challenging. During the next 4 years, you would then choose from that list. What is the expanded uncertainty for an organization? How can that uncertainty be calculated? Expanded uncertainty, if you're not versed in calibration, it's a value plus a degree of uncertainty. It's kind of complex as far as calculating uncertainty. We actually give workshops on the calculated uncertainty, how to calculate uncertainty, and it's different between the different disciplines. You have significant contributors depending on what you're calibrating. It's going to be dependent on what goes into your uncertainty calculation. But what the expanded uncertainty is, during the calculation of uncertainty, you typically will see a K factor. So basically, let's say if you're calibrating a length measurement and you assign it a value of 1 inch plus or minus 0.0005 inches as a measurement uncertainty. If that's an expanded uncertainty, that 0.00005 inch is the gray area. That's a rather large uncertainty. It's typically in micro inches. That's the gray area around the value where, as it says, you're uncertain about. If Intra-Lab PT is needed, what process or specific form to fill out if needed, and who do we submit them to? There is no specific form. You just have to provide it in writing. It could even be an email. And you would just submit it to PJLA headquarters. Not sure basically if you want to give our office a call, they can give you the direct email address to where those inquiries need to go. Can proficiency tests be done by labs using different methods? Ideally, you want to conduct the PT by labs using the appropriate methods. If the labs are using different methods, I would say that would be acceptable if you resort, if there is no third-party providers, and that is the only InterLab partner that you can conduct the PT test for. So that's kind of a gray area there. I would think it would be dependent upon the type of test or calibration that's being performed. But generally, if it's that same artifact that's being tested or calibrated, ideally you would want the labs to use the same method. If not feasible, then I would say that different methods would be appropriate. Question: if the other lab used for Inter-Lab study is accredited for the test, produces data that fails, do we report the finding to PJLA or discuss with lab? Can't make out the last part of the question. Like I said, if you're doing an Inter-Lab test, if it's two labs, and basically if they don't compare to each other, which lab is off, or they both could be off. I would say, as far as PJLA is concerned, you can discuss it with the other labs. We're not concerned with that. We're just concerned with looking at the results. If it does fail, and it could be dependent upon the other lab's results, I would say you'd still going to have to take corrective action as far as determining whether or not it was your lab, and it may require, as far as corrective action, some internal testing or perhaps even an intra-lab test just to follow up and on any failed PT test results that may have been due to the other lab's results that you were comparing them to. Can you tell us an example for which a calibration area for which suitable PT does not exist? When it comes to mind, I gave you the one example of the furnace in the oven. The one we see a lot in calibration is we have a lot of scale companies that are out there that are doing anything from an analytical type balance on up to truck scales, and they're accredited to do all those things. We have identified a third-party proficiency testing provider for the analytical balance, and in those cases, it was a while there where there weren't any. That just the fact that you're putting a balance and perhaps shipping it could jeopardize the electronics and the validity of the traceable results for that balance. And what the third-party provider does in that instance is provide altered test weights. But on those other areas where you have like floor scales, truck scales, more industrial type application, that's an example we come across a lot. We have quite a few scale companies under us that in those instances there is no third-party provider for heavy-duty scales and balances. Do you have a list of labs for proficiency tests? And this is the last question I have. On our website, we do have under proficiency testing tools. Proficiency testing provider is a list of third-party providers. So we do have a list of proficiency testing providers. It's not all exclusive, but that is available upon our website. Again, I apologize for the ones I could not answer. Like I said, I will try. We do have your contact information. I will research. I'll send those, particularly you're talking about the destructive testing, to the appropriate personnel to get back with you in regards to those questions. Again, I want to thank everybody for logging in to this month's. I hope it was beneficial. Again, like I said, PT is an area that especially applicant organizations sometimes have trouble in getting that initial PT under their belt, get it analyzed, and like we said, you have to have one successful PT under your belt before you can get accredited, and then of course developing the 4-year plan. As you can see on the screen, the next webinar is not too far down the road. It's actually scheduled for the 9th of June this year, next month, and that's Eastern Time. And the topic we're going to look at is Section 415. Excuse me, we did mention that today. That's management review requirements, in which one of the line items that needs to be covered in management reviews is proficiency testing. Again, thank you, and appreciate everyone signing in, and we hope to have you on board in June. So enjoy the rest of your day.